The 2003 Royal Rumble had a runtime of 54 minutes. It premiered on January 19th at the Fleet Center in Boston, Massachusetts. 15,338 fans were in attendance with Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler on commentary. Lillian Garcia was the ring announcer for this evening.
2003 was fantastic. One of the most underrated Rumbles ever. I thought Chris Jericho was a highlight of that Rumble. He kicked off the Rumble by taking out Shawn Michaels and setting up their feud for Wrestlemania 19. He lasted a long time until Lesnar came out. And we all knew that Lesnar was going to win that one. Once again, very predictable, but it goes to show you sometimes that predictability doesn't hurt a match. It's all about the delivery, and I thought that Rumble in particular was fantastic. So definitely one of the best Rumbles in history.
Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of the 2003 Royal Rumble match. Now, if the 2002 Rumble was the final WWF Royal Rumble match, then it stands to reason that the very next year's Rumble would be the very first WWE Royal Rumble. It was also the first Royal Rumble match to be performed under the Raw vs. SmackDown brand split idea. Future Rumbles would probably do the Raw vs. SmackDown thing a little bit better, but this was the first one to kind of toy with that concept a little bit, and I think they got some mileage out of it. I think overall this was a really fun Rumble, even if the outcome was a little obvious. It is a very entertaining one and a more colorful and memorable one than maybe the previous year's Rumble. And overall it was fun to go back and rewatch it for the purpose of this review. But before I go into the specifics, let's cover some key Rumble stats. Most eliminations was won by Chris Jericho, who entered at number 2. He had 6 eliminations overall. Longest time also held by Chris Jericho, entered at number 2, lasted 38 minutes and 54 seconds. I guess it stands to reason if you enter early and last the longest, you have the most chances for the most eliminations. So, not surprising that Chris Jericho would set those records for this particular Rumble. And the Final Four, get a load of this for the Final Four. The Final Four were Batista, who entered at 28, Kane, who entered at 22, Undertaker, who entered at 30, and Brock Lesnar, who entered at 29 and ultimately won the Royal Rumble. So the Final Four, of the Final Four, 3 of them were 28, 29, and 30. So I guess you could say the luck of the draw really came into play for the 2003 Royal Rumble. And as I said, Brock Lesnar, who entered at 29, ultimately won the thing. Although I should point out that Brock Lesnar had to earn his way into the Royal Rumble by defeating Big Show in the opening match earlier on this event. Fun fact there. The winner of the Rumble actually wasn't a legal entrant in the Rumble until the night of the show. So fun, a little fun fact that maybe has been washed away by the sands of time, and maybe not a lot of people remember that. But yeah, Big Show and Lesnar had a match, and Lesnar beat Big Show, got his revenge for Survivor Series 02, and earned his way to the Rumble match, which he ultimately won. But also, some notable Royal Rumble debuts. We had some ECW standouts like Tajiri and Tommy Dreamer. 3-Minute Warning, Jamal and Rosie made their Rumble debut. They were a tag team that I liked. I wish they had kind of achieved more, but very unfortunate that they didn't. This was also the Royal Rumble debut of Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, John Cena, Batista, so some big names here making their first Rumble appearance. Oh, and Bill DeMott also made his Royal Rumble debut, for those of you who care. And actually, this was, to get into the specifics of the Rumble, I already mentioned Brock Lesnar and how his victory was obvious, and I'm going to talk about HBK and Chris Jericho in a little bit, because I felt like their story was really the main appeal of this particular Rumble. But I thought this match did a much better job of utilizing its 30 participants better than the 2002 Rumble did, and it didn't necessarily do a lot of things to build up to WrestleMania outside of Jericho and HBK. Maybe Taker and A-Train to some degree. It didn't necessarily get a lot of, mileage for the future, but it did do a really good job of taking advantage of its history and of the brand split. In this Rumble, you saw 4 of the SmackDown 6 getting featured. The SmackDown 6 are famously Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit, who are not in the Rumble match because they were in the SmackDown World Title match earlier on the show. Excellent match for those of you who haven't seen it. You also had Edge, Rey Mysterio, Chavo Guerrero, and Eddie Guerrero. And those 6 guys were heavily featured in some excellent tag team matches that were going on SmackDown in late 2002. And they were really kind of the heart and soul of the brand at that time. And you got to see 4 of them featured in this Rumble match. You also got to see a bunch of former tag teams and current tag teams all interacting with each other. And they got a lot of mileage out of that. You got Rey and Edge, who, as I said, were former SmackDown Tag Team Champions at that point, and current tag team partners at that point, but they got to face off against each other and work with each other. Edge and Christian had kind of a mini reunion where Christian thought he could coerce Edge into helping him, but Edge was having none of that. You had a clash between the Hardy Boys. Jeff was still a face at this point, but Matt was doing the Mattitude version 1 thing, so they took advantage of their history. Shannon Moore got involved as well. You had Kane and Rob Van Dam working together towards the end of the Rumble before Kane ultimately turned on Rob Van Dam. They were a tag team on Raw at that point. And you also had a brief reunion of the Brothers of Destruction before Taker eliminated Kane. All other tag teams that were featured, as I said, 3-minute warning, and also Team Angle, Haas and Benjamin, one of the best tag teams of all time that didn't get a solid run because WWE stopped focusing on tag teams in the mid-2000s. They should have gone on to be like this legendary tag team, and I don't think they ever got to reach that status, which is a shame because they were great. But yeah, the whole stories with all the partners and former partners and all of that stuff going on, I thought that created a lot of great dynamics throughout the match and great character interactions, and it took advantage of their pre-established history. So it was entertaining, and it gave the match a lot of flavor. And it also kind of rewarded the fans that have been paying attention for the last few years. It's like, oh yeah, the Hardy Boys, they were a tag team a couple years ago. Oh yeah, Edge and Christian, they were a tag team a couple years ago. Kane and The Undertaker, they have a long history together. They took advantage of a lot of those things that had happened in the past, and they intermingled it really well with the stuff that was going on in the present, like Kane and RVD being partners, and Rey and Edge being partners, and so on and so on. And I really liked all of that stuff, and I thought that gave this particular Rumble a nice backbone and something for the guys that had absolutely no prayer of winning this thing. Gave them something to do and gave them a little bit more flavor and made the match a lot more fun to watch. A couple other things, I guess, from a historical standpoint. As I mentioned, this was John Cena's Royal Rumble debut, and he came out and did a rap that sounded horrible. I guess he was still learning at this point, wasn't fully acclimated to the persona that he would ultimately develop that would get over with the audience. And then he would ultimately become the top babyface of the company, and we all know how that went. But, it is very interesting to see this very young, pun intended, prototype version of John Cena. And, if you're a John Cena fan, check this one out. You get to see a very, very early stage John Cena perform in this Royal Rumble. Also, Batista as well, a very raw, unpolished Batista, but he got to last all the way to the end of the Final Four and get to show his brute strength up against guys like Undertaker and Kane and Brock Lesnar. So there were signs that maybe he could be mingled in with some of those top guys, but it was not to be on this night. But he would eventually have his day, obviously. But the main story of this Rumble, and the main reason that I look back on this Royal Rumble positively, is the storyline between Shawn Michaels making his Royal Rumble return and Chris Jericho. They took the number 1 and 2 spots of the Rumble respectively. Jericho wanted the number 1 spot because he wanted to out Shawn Michaels, and he wanted to prove that whatever Shawn could do, he could do it better. And Jericho wanted the number 1 spot because he wanted to go all the way and win the Rumble and duplicate Shawn's accomplishment from 1995, but do it better. Shawn took the number 1 spot instead. Shawn had returned in mid-2002 for SummerSlam against Triple H, had that feud, and now it was time for Chris Jericho and Shawn to have their big Mania program, one that I was very excited for. And they'd been feuding up to this point, so this was the next chapter of the story. And I talked about this earlier when I reviewed Royal Rumble 2002, but we already had the story in play here, and now it was time to do this huge part of the chapter. And I thought what they did here was very, very good, where you're thinking, okay, got Shawn at number 1, you got Jericho at number 2, they're going to fight all the way throughout the Rumble and try to outdo each other. That is not what we got, and I loved what they did. Thanks to help from Christian, Jericho was able to sneak attack Shawn Michaels, leave him bloodied, hit him with a chair, low blow him, do everything he could, and eliminate Shawn Michaels very, very early. Shawn, I believe, ended up lasting like 2.5 minutes. He did not last very long at all. And I love that they did that because it put so much heat on Jericho because it's like, all right, you're cheating us out of the dream match that we wanted, Shawn and Jericho. You sneak attacked Shawn like a cowardly prick. You robbed us of the feel-good moment of Shawn Michaels' Royal Rumble return and him potentially repeating his achievement from '95. Fuck you, Jericho. And I thought that was a great way to tell the story, and it allowed Jericho to get all the heat he needed, and then be the marathon man throughout the Rumble, where it's like, oh my God, if Jericho goes all the way and wins the Rumble after what he did to Shawn, fuck that guy. Of course, Shawn Michaels came out later in the Rumble with all bandaged up and attacked Chris Jericho and cost him the Royal Rumble. So now the stage was set for WrestleMania. They cost each other the Royal Rumble, and now we were going to get that classic showdown at WrestleMania. So if I wasn't excited at the prospect of a Jericho-Shawn Michaels match before, which I was definitely excited for it after this moment because I thought all of this was handled very well. It was very daring because, some people may feel like that they're being cheated by not getting a strong Royal Rumble performance out of Shawn, but I was like, look, it got heat. And, put the heat on Jericho, put the heat on the heel, and kept the story moving, and Shawn got his revenge by the end. But to me, after this Rumble, I thought the stage was more than ready for a Jericho-Shawn Michaels showdown, and I thought the 2003 Royal Rumble match was a great next chapter in that story heading into WrestleMania. They didn't do a whole heck of a lot to build up to WrestleMania for everybody else, but for those two, I thought they did amazingly well, and that was really the major highlight of the Rumble for me. We got towards the end, and we got some interesting things that took place. We got a very cool elimination series of eliminations, actually, from Brock Lesnar as he eliminated Team Angle single-handedly, and then he F5 Matt Hardy out of the ring on top of them. So that was a cool little spot. You got Maven thinking that he eliminated The Undertaker for the second year in a row for a great callback to the earlier Rumble, but didn't work this time. Undertaker simply kicked his ass and threw him out of the ring, but that was a fantastic callback to the year before, I thought. You also got, if you want a Rumble botch, there's a small moment towards the end where Taker and Brock are fighting, and Taker looks like he kind of gets flipped over the top rope, or he's gonna go flying out of the ring before the finish can be done, and Lesnar deliberately pulls Taker back into the ring to keep him from falling out and costing them the finish, which was very obvious what was going on, but it's also kind of a funny little moment if you know what to look for. So interesting little thing for those of you who are into the botchamania element to these type of things. And speaking of Undertaker, this was his return after a few months on the shelf. He had taken some time off after the Hell in a Cell match with Brock where he put him over. And I remember there being some speculation that Taker was going to come back at this match. He was going to come back in this match as the Dead Man. There were some very misleading vignettes leading up to the Rumble that kind of seemed to indicate that Taker was going to come back as the Dead Man. Didn't happen. He came back as the American Badass. But if the crowd was disappointed, they didn't vocalize that. But I remember online there was some speculation that Taker was going to change back to the Dead Man for the Rumble, which didn't happen. But I think maybe WWE kind of caused that speculation to take place when they started airing those vignettes, hyping Taker's return. It somewhat indicated that he was going to be coming back as the Dead Man, although I think the last one the week before the Rumble or something like that showed clips of him as the American Badass. So I think what they were going for was like a history of The Undertaker to kind of build anticipation for his return and not like an indication that he was coming back as the Dead Man. I think they kind of caused, it wasn't a huge internet backlash, but I do remember some people being disappointed that he didn't come back as the Dead Man. But it wasn't a huge shitstorm or anything like that. Of course, this was also before Twitter and YouTube and everything else, so maybe like the platform wasn't there for people to raise a stink over it, so who knows. But like I said, Brock Lesnar won the Rumble, and I said that Triple H's victory in 2002 might be the most obvious Rumble of all time. This one might be even more obvious. I think we all knew that Lesnar was going to win this thing, even though he wasn't officially entered into the Rumble until the night of the show when he beat Big Show. I knew as far back as Survivor Series 2002 when he dropped the title to Big Show, I was like, Lesnar's going to win the Rumble. It was just that obvious. Not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think they built up Lesnar enough to a point where people wanted him to win the Rumble. And it wasn't like, you didn't have Roman Reigns disease where, everybody was just waiting to shit on it. I think everybody wanted Brock to win. But for what it was very obvious. I called it as far back as November. So when Lesnar won, it didn't shock me. He last eliminated The Undertaker, getting over on Taker yet again after defeating him in Hell in a Cell. So Lesnar was primed and ready to face Kurt Angle for the world title, for the WWE title, I should say, at WrestleMania 19 in the main event, although that match almost didn't happen for a multitude of reasons, and the story surrounding that one is quite an interesting one and probably worthy of a review and a discussion during a WrestleMania retrospective of some kind. But we're talking about the Royal Rumble here, and overall, despite the obvious outcome of Lesnar's victory, I thought the 2003 Royal Rumble was a lot of fun. I thought the past, former, and current tag teams all intermingling throughout the Rumble was a lot of fun. I thought the Jericho-Michaels story gave it a huge backbone and was easily the highlight of the Rumble for me. And if you're a big Brock Lesnar mark, this one is must-see because this was his big Royal Rumble victory. So I thought this Rumble, again, I probably wouldn't say it's one of my favorite Rumbles, but it is a colorful one and it is a lot of fun. So I did enjoy watching it. And giving it a rewatch, I think I enjoyed it even more now than I did the first time I saw it. So it's an enjoyable one and I recommend checking it out.
The overall grade for the 2003 Royal Rumble is an A-.